I took the night guard job at Rose Hill Funeral Home out of desperation. After 2 failed attempts at keeping steady employment in Portland, I needed something that paid, no matter how strange. The listing had been vague. Overnight security needed for quiet rural establishment, must follow house protocols, pays weekly in cash. That last line was enough to convince me. Rose Hill sat on the edge of a forgotten forest in rural Maine. The trees behind it were unnaturally tall, branches tangled like arms reaching for something above them. The road that led there was gravel, winding, and half the time cloaked in fog that clung like wet fabric. I arrived on a Monday evening in October, the wind already colder than I was prepared for. The owner, a man named Mr. Delaney, met me at the front steps. He was in his 70s, thin as a wire, and moved with a quiet sort of urgency. He didn't shake hands or smile, just nodded once and led me through the funeral home. The place was old, obviously, wooden floors that creaked no matter how softly you stepped, wallpaper yellowed with age, and light fixtures that buzzed lowly even when switched off. The air inside smelled of incense and something faintly metallic, like blood. "You'll have full run of the house," Mr. Delaney said, unlocking a small office near the front parlor. "Except for the embalming room and the east wing basement. Never go in there. Never." I nodded, trying to hide the chill crawling up my back. He handed me a set of keys. "Now, there are a few rules you must follow. Memorize them." He slid a worn piece of paper across the desk. The rules were typed, but someone had underlined specific ones in red ink. I read them aloud, one by one. 1. Lock all outside doors by 10:30 p.m. sharp. 2. Lights must remain off in viewing room B after midnight. 3. If you hear whispering, do not respond. 4. If a knock comes from inside a coffin, ignore it. 5. Do not look into the mirrors between 3:12 and 3:33 a.m. 6. Feed the black cat at exactly 2 a.m. It will come to the back door. Do not pet it. 7. Do not leave before 6 a.m., no matter what you see or hear. "These are not suggestions," Mr. Delaney added. "You follow them, and you'll get your money. You break them." He didn't finish that sentence. I wanted to laugh. It all felt like some elaborate prank. But Mr. Delaney's expression didn't shift. He wasn't joking. Not even a little. That first night, I took my post in the small office with the single flickering lamp and the hum of an old desktop computer that looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. I walked the halls once every hour like I was told, checking locks, making notes in the logbook, trying to ignore the way the building seemed to sigh around me. At 10:28 p.m., I locked the last of the exterior doors. At midnight, I turned off the lights in viewing room B and tried not to think about why that rule existed. At 1:30 a.m., I started to hear the whispers. They weren't loud, just faint murmurs coming from the direction of the east wing basement, the one I'd been warned about. The voices were hushed, almost like they were in prayer or conversation. I pressed my back to the wall outside the office and stared at the dark hallway, heart pounding. I didn't respond. I didn't move. Eventually, the voices faded. At 2 a.m., like clockwork, the black cat showed up. It scratched at the back door 3 times. I opened it cautiously. The cat was large, jet black, with glowing yellow eyes that didn't reflect light like normal cats. It waited while I set a bowl of food on the steps, then began eating without acknowledging me. When I reached out to pet it, almost by instinct, it hissed, its back arching and eyes flashing. I jerked my hand away and shut the door fast. The cat finished its food and disappeared into the trees. At 3 a.m., I began to feel heavy, not tired, oppressed, like something was watching me from every shadow. I made the mistake of glancing into a mirror in the hallway as I passed. It wasn't 3:12 yet, but something was already wrong. In the reflection, I saw myself standing still, but I wasn't still. I was walking. I blinked, and the mirror version of me smiled, slow and wide, before returning to normal. I didn't look at another mirror after that. When the clock hit 3:12 a.m., I pulled a blanket over my head and waited out the 21 minutes in silence. Nothing happened, but I felt cold the entire time, like the heat had been sucked from the building. By 5:45 a.m., I was counting the seconds. I didn't even care about the money anymore. I just wanted the sun to rise. At 6 a.m. sharp, I stood outside the front door, looking at the tree line, breathing in the clean air like I hadn't taken a real breath all night. The forest still looked sinister in the early light, but at least it was light. Mr. Delaney arrived at 6:30. "You followed the rules?" he asked, stepping out of his old Buick. "Yes, sir," I said. My voice shook more than I wanted it to. "Good. Come back tonight, same time." He didn't ask how I was, didn't offer a thank you, just walked inside and left me on the front steps, wondering what I had just survived. That was only the first night. I should have quit then, but the money was too good, and something about Rose Hill pulled at me, like it wanted me there, or needed me. I arrived for my second night at Rose Hill Funeral Home with a knot in my stomach and a small flask of whiskey tucked in my coat pocket. I'm not much of a drinker, but after what I experienced the night before, the voices, the mirror, the black cat, I needed something to brace myself. The air was colder, the fog thicker. Mr. Delaney didn't greet me this time. The door was already unlocked, and a note sat on the front desk. "You know the rules. Don't forget rule number 4 tonight. Viewing room B is occupied." A chill ran down my spine. Viewing room B had been dark and empty the previous night. I hadn't even bothered looking inside. I swallowed hard and started my rounds, checking all the locks by 10:30 p.m. My steps echoed through the long hallways like a metronome keeping time with the silence. This time I made the mistake of glancing into viewing room B as I passed. A casket stood at the center of the room, closed. Floral arrangements surrounded it, white lilies and roses beginning to brown at the edges. The nameplate on the small table beside it read, "Eleanor Wexler, 1931-2023. The photograph showed a woman in her 90s with piercing blue eyes and a thin-lipped smile. There was something off about the picture, like the photographer had caught her mid-smirk rather than smiling. I quickly moved past and turned off the lights at midnight as instructed. By 12:45 a.m., I was back in the office, sipping from the flask and keeping an eye on the small analog clock mounted above the door. At exactly 1:03 a.m., the first knock came. Soft, slow, from inside the casket. 3 knocks, then silence. I froze, my heart slammed in my chest, my mouth dry. Another knock. I squeezed my eyes shut and repeated the rule in my head. If a knock comes from inside a coffin, ignore it. I stayed put, didn't move. The knocking stopped after a minute, but something else started. A dragging sound, slow, heavy, coming from the hallway, the creaking of old wood under weight. I leaned forward, peeking out from the office door. No one was there. And yet the sound grew louder, closer, like something was moving just out of sight. I ducked back inside the office and locked the door. The whiskey burned going down as I took another swig. I sat there in the dark for nearly 20 minutes before the sound faded away. Whatever had been dragging itself down the hall, it was gone now. At 2 a.m., the cat returned. Same as before, scratched 3 times at the back door. I fed it in silence. It stared at me the entire time it ate, not blinking. When it finished, it walked away, but this time it didn't vanish into the trees. It circled the building slowly, disappearing behind the structure. And then it didn't come back. At 2:45 a.m., I returned to my rounds. The air inside the home had shifted. The silence wasn't natural anymore. It was a tense kind of stillness, like something was waiting. Every hallway looked longer than it should. The lights flickered more than usual, and I swear the wallpaper pattern shifted if I looked too long. At 3:10 a.m., I closed every mirror in the funeral home, covered them with towels and sheets, even the small hand mirror in the restroom. I wasn't taking any chances. At 3:12, I heard crying. It was soft, coming from the East Wing basement, the one Mr. Delaney had specifically told me to avoid. The sound was unmistakable. A child. Sobbing. I stood in the center hallway, paralyzed. My instincts screamed at me to help, to go see what was wrong. But I remembered the rules. Do not go in the East Wing basement. Ever. So I didn't. I returned to the office, shaking, and waited. The crying grew louder. Not in volume, but in weight. Like it was pressing against my chest. I couldn't breathe properly. It lasted the entire 21 minutes of mirror time, right up until 3:33 a.m. Then silence again. I couldn't tell if that was better or worse. At 4 a.m., I passed viewing room B again. The casket was open. I swear it had been closed, locked. But now it sat open, the lid tilted at a strange angle. The flowers around it were dead, brown and shriveled. And the room smelled wrong, like rotten salt and something old trying to be new again. I didn't dare go in. I just kept walking. 5 a.m., almost there. My limbs were heavy, my head pounding from lack of sleep and too much adrenaline. I slumped into the chair in the office and started nodding off when the lights flickered again and went out completely. Total darkness. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, soft, bare feet on hardwood. I held my breath. The footsteps moved toward the office, stopped just outside the door. I waited for a knock. None came, but I could hear breathing just on the other side. Then, ever so slowly, the doorknob turned. It didn't open. It just turned back and forth, then stopped. I sat frozen until the power returned at 5:45 a.m., and the lights buzzed back to life like nothing had happened. At 6 a.m. sharp, I stepped outside and didn't look back. Mr. Delaney arrived, just like before. "You kept to the rules?" he asked without looking at me. "Yes," I whispered. "But the casket, it was open." He paused. "Did you touch it?" "No." He gave a slow nod. "Then you're fine. Come back tonight." "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted. He finally looked at me, his face unreadable. "You've already started. If you leave now, the rules don't protect you anymore." I didn't ask what he meant, because deep down, I think I already knew. I shouldn't have come back for the third night, but Mr. Delaney's words had lodged themselves deep in my brain. If you leave now, the rules don't protect you anymore. That sentence echoed in my mind all day like a curse. I didn't understand what he meant, not fully, but I wasn't willing to find out what breaking those rules could unleash. I arrived a few minutes before 10 p.m. The funeral home stood like a black silhouette against the fog-drenched sky. No lights on, no sound, just the wind sliding through the trees and the graveyard behind the building that I now knew stretched farther than I first thought, farther than should have been possible, really. The front door creaked open when I touched it. No locks, no Mr. Delaney waiting this time. Just the same old hallways stretching out like ribs of a sleeping beast. There was another note on the desk. "Stay out of room 6 tonight, no matter what you hear." That was it. No explanation. I didn't even know where room 6 was. I scanned the hallway, flashlight in hand, and walked slowly, trying each brass-plated door. The rooms weren't numbered logically. They jumped around. Room 1 near the front, room 3 across the hall, room 5 beside the embalming room. When I found room 6, I understood why it wasn't marked clearly. It was hidden behind a bookcase in the east wing. A false door, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. I stared at it too long. Something about the handle felt wrong, like it pulsed beneath the metal. I backed away, locked the outside doors by 10:30 p.m. as usual, turned off viewing room B's lights at midnight. I couldn't bring myself to check whether the casket was still open. Something inside me whispered not to. At 12:48 a.m., the whispering began again. Not from the east wing this time, from inside the walls. It moved behind me wherever I went. 1,000 overlapping voices, hushed and urgent, like a crowd whispering prayers in a language that shouldn't exist. Every so often I thought I could make out my name. Ethan, drawn out, wet and slow. At 1:10 a.m., I heard something slam against the door of room 6. Once, then again, then rapid, desperate pounding. I pressed my back against the opposite wall, staring at the bookcase that covered the door. The sound kept coming. Not fists, something harder, Lones. I wanted to run, but I remembered the rule. Stay out of room 6, no matter what you hear. So I didn't move. I held my breath, hands clenched so tight my fingernails bit into my skin. The pounding stopped after 3 minutes, and then the worst part came. A voice, clear, gentle, a little girl's voice. "Please let me out. It's cold in here." I felt the tears start before I even realized I was crying. I don't know why, but that voice, its tone, the emptiness behind it felt like the loneliest sound in the world. I shut my eyes and turned away. I didn't open the door. At 2 a.m., the black cat scratched at the back door again, but this time it wasn't alone. Another cat, gray and thinner, followed it. The black one hissed and lunged, chasing the gray one into the woods. I waited with the food bowl, but it didn't come back. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I finally left the bowl on the step and went back inside. At 2:30 a.m., the power flickered. Not off, just unstable. Every light buzzed and dimmed like something was sucking the life out of the wiring. I checked the generator in the back hall. The panel had scratch marks on it. long, deep, like claws. At 3 a.m., I began my ritual of covering the mirrors. Only one left uncovered, the tall antique mirror in the east hallway. The cloth I had used the previous night was gone. I grabbed another from the linen closet and approached it slowly. But before I could cover it, I froze. Something stood behind my reflection. It was me, but not me. Same clothes, same height. But its eyes were pitch black, its smile impossibly wide, and its hands were slowly reaching toward my shoulders from behind. I spun around. Nothing. When I looked back into the mirror, the reflection was normal. I threw the cloth over it and backed away. At 3:12 a.m., I returned to the office and locked the door. I didn't move for 21 minutes. The entire time, I heard pacing outside the office door. Heavy boots, slow and deliberate. They didn't match the footsteps from the night before. These felt like someone inspecting, judging. At 3:33, the pacing stopped. The moment the clock ticked over, I opened the door. The hallway was empty, but on the floor just outside the office was a trail of black, wet footprints leading down the hall toward the viewing rooms. They weren't shoe prints. They were bare feet, and they were enormous. At 4:20 a.m., I made my rounds again, trying not to look at room 6. But as I passed it, I heard humming. That same childlike voice, humming a lullaby. I picked up my pace. At 5 a.m., the air in the building changed again. The walls felt tighter, the ceilings lower, like the entire funeral home was holding its breath. That's when the alarm chime went off. Motion detected in viewing room B. My stomach dropped. I had never touched the alarm system. Didn't even know there were motion sensors installed. I forced myself to walk down the hallway, every step heavier than the last. When I reached the room, I stopped at the threshold and turned on my flashlight. The casket was open again, but now it was empty. The flowers were gone. The photograph of Eleanor Wexler lay face down on the ground. I didn't enter. I just backed away, whispering, "No, no, no," under my breath. I waited by the front door until 6 a.m., barely breathing. When the time hit, I bolted outside into the misty morning. I didn't even wait for Mr. Delaney. I got in my car and sat there until he pulled up 10 minutes later. "You opened room 6?" he asked immediately, before even getting out. "No," I said, shaking. He nodded once. "Good," then added, "but something got close to convincing you." I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't want to know. He walked past me without another word. That night I dreamt of the mirror, of myself, smiling, reaching for Rican 3. The fourth night began with dread. Not fear, not anxiety. Dread, a thick, slow-moving kind that sank into your chest and weighed you down like lead. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes outside the funeral home, watching the windows for movement, listening for whispers in the trees. The fog was heavier than any night before, so thick it was like the world outside didn't exist past the gravel lot. Eventually, I forced myself to get out. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, each step toward that rotting building harder than the last. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. Inside, the air had changed again. It was humid, like the walls were sweating. The light bulbs flickered with more urgency now, and some of them buzzed loud enough to sound like whispers. Another note waited for me on the front desk. But this time it was shorter. Just one sentence, written in jagged red ink. "There's something in the vents. Don't look up." That was it. I didn't even want to know how it got into the vents, or why Mr. Delaney knew about it and still expected me to work here like it was nothing. At 10:30 p.m., I locked the doors. My hands shook every time a key scraped in a lock. I double-checked every bolt, every latch. Then I began my rounds. The hallways were quieter than usual, unnaturally so, like the walls were listening, waiting. As I passed the hallway near viewing room B, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A figure, just standing there. When I turned to look directly, it was gone, but I knew it had been there, a shape tall and still, like someone watching without breathing. At midnight, I turned off the lights in viewing room B, not daring to glance inside. I didn't need to see if the casket was still empty. I already knew it was. At 12:32 a.m., I heard scratching from above. It moved through the ceiling, slow and dragging, like claws across metal. I remembered the note, "Don't look up," and kept my eyes on the floor, but it was hard. The sound followed me from room to room, always just above. At one point, it stopped directly overhead, and the vent cover rattled. Then it started breathing. Heavy, wheezing breaths that matched my own rhythm like it was mimicking me. I stood perfectly still, counting backward from 100 in my head until it moved again. At 1:15 a.m., I passed room 6. The bookcase covering the door was slightly ajar. I didn't touch it, didn't even stop, just kept walking, though I could feel something behind that door, waiting, breathing. At 2 a.m., I went to the back door for the cat. It didn't show up. Instead, a trail of wet paw prints led from the tree line to the steps and stopped. No prints going back. The bowl of food I had left the night before was overturned, the metal bent like something had crushed it. The scent of something coppery lingered in the air, and I turned away before I could gag. At 2:38 a.m., I heard crying. Again, the same childlike voice from before. But this time it didn't come from room 6. It came from the vents. It echoed through the ducts, distant but clear. A little girl sobbing, whispering things I couldn't quite understand. I covered my ears and walked faster. Every instinct screamed for me to look up, to find the source. But I didn't. At 3:12 a.m., the mirror ritual began again. This time, every sheet I had placed the night before was missing. All of them. Every mirror was uncovered, waiting. I didn't even try to cover them again. I just averted my eyes and stuck to the hallway walls. But as I passed the long antique mirror in the east hallway, something inside it moved. Not a reflection, a shape. Tall, pale, thin. Its limbs too long. Its head tilted slightly like it was studying me. It stood just behind the edge of the reflection, like it was trapped there or waiting to be invited out. I didn't stop walking. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the lights in the building died. Not flickered. Died. I was left in total blackness. I stayed frozen in place for what felt like an hour, but my watch said only 4 minutes had passed. Then the emergency lights kicked on. Dim red bulbs scattered through the hallways like bleeding eyes. That's when I saw the doors. Every door in the funeral home had opened. Not wide, just slightly. Room 1, room 3, room 5, even the embalming room, all cracked open like someone had gone through unlocking each one, daring me to peek inside. I didn't, but I couldn't help noticing. The air was colder near those doors. I could see my breath. And somewhere deep in the building, I heard footsteps. Fast, barefoot, running. At 4:15 a.m., something new happened. I found a note taped to the office door. It wasn't Mr. Delaney's handwriting. It looked like it had been scratched into the paper by a nail or bone. You're almost ready. Almost ready for what? I tore it down and stuffed it in my pocket, heart racing. That phrase repeated in my head like a warning. At 5 a.m., I tried to sit in the office and breathe, but the temperature in the room kept changing. 1 second it was ice cold. The next it was sweltering. My ears popped like I was in an airplane. Then a strange smell filled the space. Cinnamon and something else. Burned hair. I stood up and stepped into the hallway just in time to see someone disappear around the corner. I followed. Slowly, each hallway twisted in ways it hadn't before. I swear, some were longer than they'd ever been, others too short. I found myself standing in front of a new door. It wasn't labeled. It was white, smooth, and had no handle. Just a brass keyhole. I leaned in to examine it, and from the other side came a single knock. I turned and ran. At 5:50 a.m., the lights returned to normal. The air cleared. The building settled, like it always did. At 6 a.m., I walked out the front door without even waiting to see Mr. Delaney. I couldn't face him. I drove straight home, heart pounding the entire way, half expecting to see something in the back seat every time I checked the mirror. When I got home, I pulled the note out of my coat pocket and stared at it again. You're almost ready. I didn't sleep that day. I couldn't, because I realized something. The rules don't just keep you safe. They prepare you for something. And I had the sickening feeling I was getting closer to finding out what that something was. By the 5th night, I no longer questioned the things I saw. I didn't rationalize the voices, the footsteps, the mirrors that moved on their own. I accepted them. Not because I understood what was happening, but because I had no choice. You don't survive Rose Hill by asking questions. You survive by obeying. I pulled into the lot at 9:58 p.m. This time, the fog wasn't just thick, it was alive. It moved in slow, spiraling tendrils, curling around the tires of my car like fingers. As I stepped out, I swore I felt something brush against my leg. I didn't stop, didn't look. I made it to the front door, which as always now creaked open before I touched the handle. Inside something was different, colder, quieter, like the building was holding its breath again. A small envelope lay on the reception desk. No name, just sealed with black wax. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was another rule, written in a rushed, messy scrawl. Tonight, room 6 will call to you. You must not answer, no matter what voice it uses. Below it, a smear of something dark and crusted stained the paper. I swallowed hard and shoved it into my pocket. This night felt different, like a shift had occurred. The walls no longer groaned softly, they pulsed. There was a heartbeat in the floorboards now. I was sure of it. I did the usual, locked the exterior doors by 10:30 p.m., walked the halls, flashlight in one hand, the other clenched tight to keep it from shaking. At midnight, I turned off the lights in viewing room B. The casket was gone now, completely removed, but no one had come to claim it. No van, no paperwork. Mr. Delaney had said nothing. The floor where it once stood was stained with something dark that hadn't been there before. At 12:44 a.m., I heard humming again, the same childlike melody from before. But this time it was coming from every hallway at once. The building echoed with the tune, as though a choir of unseen children had memorized it. Their voices filled the walls, the vents, the cracks beneath every door. I stood in the center of the funeral home, turning in slow circles, listening. Then, softly from room 6, "Ethan, it's me, Mom." My knees nearly gave out. That voice, it wasn't just close, it was perfect. My mother had died 2 years ago in her sleep, and somehow her voice came out of that room like she was standing just on the other side. "Please open the door. It's cold and I miss you." I stared at the false bookcase. It trembled. Not shook, trembled, like something behind it was trying to hold still but failing. "No," I whispered, clenching my eyes shut. "No, no." Then a second voice joined hers. My father, then my sister, then someone I didn't recognize, but who knew my name, my childhood, my secrets. They all begged, pleaded, whispered promises. They told me I was loved, that I belonged to them, that I'd be safe if I just stepped inside. I dropped to my knees in the hallway, covering my ears. Tears leaked down my face as I screamed, "Shut up!" until my throat was raw. Eventually, the voices stopped. Silence returned. But I knew that door wasn't going to stop calling. At 2 a.m., I went to the back door. No cat this time. Just a single small black feather on the ground, stuck to the step with something thick and red. I didn't touch it. I placed the food anyway, just in case, and returned inside. At 2:45 a.m., I found a handprint on the office window. It wasn't human. 5 fingers, long and bent at unnatural angles, stretched wide as if trying to reach inside. It was printed in ash. When I blinked, it was gone. At 3 a.m., I covered the mirrors again. They had all been uncovered since the last night, and their surfaces were worse than before. Clouded, yes, but the reflections they showed weren't of the building anymore. They showed places I didn't recognize. Forests, caves, a room lined with clocks, all ticking out of sync. In one mirror I saw my own face, but with no eyes. At 3:12 a.m., I barricaded myself in the office and waited. The pacing returned, but this time it came from inside the vents. It circled the room 3 times, scraping metal on metal. Then it dropped something through the grate. A single tooth. It clattered on the floor beside my chair. I didn't move. Not until 3:33 a.m. passed and the sound faded. I left the tooth where it was. At 4:10 a.m. I checked the hallway again. Room 6's bookcase was wide open. The door behind it stood exposed, just barely cracked. A pale blue light leaked from the opening. The air smelled sweet like perfume and rot. As I backed away, the light dimmed, and from inside the room I heard my own voice. "Please help me. It's so dark in here." I turned and ran. At 5 a.m., every clock in the building stopped ticking, even the digital ones, even my watch. Time didn't exist for a full minute. I wandered the halls in complete stillness, unsure if I was dreaming or dead. The air shimmered, like heat waves over pavement. Doors bent and shifted in the corners of my eyes, and then a scream. Not from room 6, not from the vents, from inside the walls themselves. A howl of rage, pain, hunger. It rattled the bones of the building, and then the clock started again. At 6 a.m., I stepped out into the morning light, expecting the world to be different somehow, but it wasn't. The sun still rose, birds still sang, and Mr. Delaney stood on the steps waiting for me. "You made it through," he said. I nodded, barely able to hold myself upright. He handed me a fresh envelope. This one sealed with white wax. Only one night left, he said. After that, it decides. It. He didn't answer. He turned and went inside, the door closing behind him with a final heavy thud. I looked down at the envelope. It was labeled simply, Final Instructions. I didn't open it. Not yet. I didn't sleep on the 6th day. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that open door behind the bookcase and heard my own voice begging to be freed from behind it. I didn't want to go back to Rose Hill, but I had the white envelope in my jacket pocket, the one Mr. Ross Delaney had given me the morning before, and I knew whatever was inside held the only chance of surviving the final night. As the sun began to set, I sat on my bed and finally broke the wax seal. Inside was a single handwritten page. The ink was pale gray, shaky. Whoever had written this had done so in haste. The note read, Final Instructions, Night 6. Do not answer the phone. The dead will gather in the viewing rooms. Do not look them in the eyes. If the building whispers your name 3 times, speak a false one. Room 6 must be entered tonight, but not until 4:44 a.m. You will know why. Do not pray. If you see the black cat, follow it. At sunrise, if you are still yourself, leave and never return. That was it. No signature, no return address, just a final list of rules that felt more like a prophecy than a warning. I arrived at Rose Hill at exactly 9:55 p.m. For the first time since I started, the building looked different. The windows were dark, not black, but empty, like staring into holes punched through the skin of the world. I didn't want to go inside, but the door opened on its own. The air inside was hot and dry, like a furnace had been running for hours. A deep hum filled the space, a vibration so low I felt it in my bones before I heard it in my ears. I didn't bother with the office. I didn't need any more notes. At 10:30 p.m., I locked every door, double-checking them, then made my way through the funeral home like I was walking through a dream I didn't belong in. At 11:45 p.m., the phone started ringing. All of them. Office phone, wall phones, even a dusty rotary that hadn't worked since the 1960s. They all rang at once, a deafening, discordant shriek that set every nerve in my body on fire. I let them ring. By midnight, they stopped. The silence that followed was worse. At 12:30 a.m., I passed viewing room A. Inside stood over a dozen people. They weren't moving, just standing around a closed casket, hands folded, faces blank. I didn't recognize any of them, but their skin was too pale, eyes too clouded, clothes covered in dried soil. They were the dead. They didn't speak, didn't blink, just watched me as I passed the doorway. I kept my eyes low. Viewing room B was the same. More of them. Dozens. All silent, all facing the hall, all waiting. I kept walking. At 1:15 a.m., the building whispered my name, once, then twice, then a third time, Ethan. It echoed through the walls, soft and seductive. I paused. My lips trembled. Speak a false one, the instructions said. Michael, I whispered. The air hissed, disappointed, the walls quieted. At 2 a.m., the black cat returned. Its fur was matted, eyes glowing bright like burning coals. It didn't meow. It just turned and began walking slowly down the hall. I followed. It led me through hallways that shouldn't have existed, ones I had never seen before. The funeral home stretched and twisted, doors rearranging themselves, floorboards creaking like distant thunder. The cat stopped before a small wooden door I had never noticed. Inside was a single mirror, cracked, clouded, and in it I saw myself, but older, worn, covered in ash. My reflection mouthed something over and over. Burn it. Then the mirror shattered. The cat vanished. I turned and ran. At 3 a.m., I waited in the office, heart pounding as the walls began to breathe. The hum in the building grew louder, deeper, as though something massive stirred beneath the floor. And then, for the first time, the floor itself buckled, rising and falling like the belly of a sleeping animal. The funeral home was alive. At 3:33 a.m., the light bulbs exploded. Every single one. Glass rained down from the ceiling in gentle flakes. I shielded my face and staggered into the hallway. The building was pitch black, except for one light, a pale blue glow leaking from behind the bookcase. Room 6. At 4:44 a.m., I stood before the open door. The time had come. Inside, the room was impossibly large, too large. It extended in all directions, walls made of mirrors, floor made of fog. In the center, a chair, and Mr. Delaney. He looked older, frail, like he had aged 100 years since the morning before. "You made it," he said, voice hollow. "What is this place?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "It's not a place. It's a crossing, a choice. The house tests you. If you break the rules, it takes you. If you obey, you earn the right to choose." "Choose what?" He pointed behind me. I turned and saw myself, but not as I was. This version of me stood tall, smiling with hollow eyes. It wore my uniform, held my keys, but something ancient lived inside it. "You can leave," Mr. Delaney said, "or stay, but if you stay, it leaves." The other version of me grinned wider. I understood then. Rosehill didn't need a night guard. It needed a warden, someone to keep the balance, someone to feed the rules, someone to take Mr. Delaney's place. He stood, walked to the doppelganger, and placed the keys in its hand. Then he looked at me. "I lasted 30 years, he whispered. "It's your turn." I didn't respond. I just watched as he stepped into the fog and vanished. The doppelganger walked past me, humming the lullaby I had heard so many nights before. It didn't speak. It just left. I stood alone in the mirrored room and waited. At 6 a.m., I walked outside. The sun had risen. The world was normal again. But I wasn't. I still work at Rosehill, still walk the halls, still follow the rules. Because now they aren't just rules to survive. They're my rules. And if you ever see a listing for overnight work in rural Maine and the ad says cash paid weekly, no experience needed, do yourself a favor. Don't apply. Some rules are meant to be obeyed. Others are meant to keep something else from getting out.